6 months after their first trip ended, Seoul welcomed them back. The city looked almost exactly the same. The same busy streets, the same glowing signs at night, the same quiet cafes tucked into side streets. But for Ah-cheong and Won-dae, this trip felt completely different. The last time they had come as tourists. This time, they were returning to people who had become deeply important in their lives. They had been apart from Ji-sung and In-soo for 6 months. 6 months of calls and messages and carefully held feelings and the discipline of trusting God with something you want very much. When Ah-cheong stepped out of the terminal, she spotted Zoo-sung waiting near the arrival's gate. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers. The moment their eyes met, they both laughed. "Welcome back," he said softly. Ah-cheong shook her head, smiling. "You didn't have to bring flowers. I wanted to." Behind them, Won-dae walked out a few seconds later. Almost immediately, she spotted In-soo. He wasn't holding flowers. He was simply standing there, watching the arrivals with the calm steadiness she had come to recognize. He waved. She waved back. And just like that, it felt as if no time had passed at all. Later that evening, the four of them sat together at morning verse after it had closed. The city outside was glowing. The cafe was quiet. And Ah-cheong looked around the table at these 3 people, her best friend, and the 2 men who had changed the shape of both their lives, and felt something she could only describe as deep, uncomplicated gratitude. She had come to Seoul because of a television obsession, and God, quietly, had arranged something extraordinary. The next afternoon, they returned to morning verse. The familiar bell above the door chimed as they walked inside. And Won-dae laughed the moment she saw the window seat. "Did anyone finally take my spot?" she asked. In-soo shook his head. No one dared. Ah-cheong leaned closer to Won-dae and whispered, "You have loyal management here." Won-dae smiled and sat down in the chair that had somehow become hers. It felt strangely comforting to be back. Over the next few weeks, the 4 of them fell into a familiar rhythm: morning coffee at morning verse, evening walks through the city, dinner conversations that lasted long into the night. But there was something Sung hadn't told anyone yet. He'd been planning something for months. He had thought about it carefully, the way he did everything. He had prayed about it. He had been certain for a long time. But he had wanted to do it in person, which meant waiting. One evening, after the cafe closed, he asked Won-dae to stay behind for a moment. She looked at him curiously. "That sounds serious." Ji-sung reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Won-dae's eyes widened immediately. "Wait, is that?" "Yes," he said, his composure slightly undone by nerves. "I'm planning to propose." Won-dae stared at him for a moment. Then she broke into the biggest smile. "Oh my goodness." Then she laughed. "Ah-cheong is going to faint." Ji-sung chuckled nervously. "That's exactly what I'm worried about." "When are you doing it?" Won-dae asked. "Namsan Tower," he said. "Next Saturday evening." Won-dae's smile grew wider. "That's perfect." "She's going to cry." "I know," Ji-sung said. Then, after a pause, "So am I, probably." Won-dae laughed and hugged him briefly. "She's going to say yes. She's been saying yes for months." He nodded once, took a breath, and the weight he'd been carrying quietly lifted a little. 2 weeks later, Ji-sung asked Ah-cheong if she wanted to take an evening walk. She said yes without hesitation. They took the cable car up Namsan as the city shifted from late afternoon into evening. The light was extraordinary, the kind that turns a city golden before it turns it dark. Chi-eng looked out at Seoul spreading endlessly below. "Seoul is even more beautiful at night," she said. "Yes, it is," Ji-sung said quietly. He was looking at her. She didn't notice. They stood near the observation area, watching the city. The lights of thousands of apartments and streets began appearing one by one as the evening settled in. Ji-sung had been quiet for the last few minutes. Then he turned toward her. "Acheong." She looked at him. Something in his expression made her go still. He reached into his pocket slowly, and Ak Cheng's hand rose to cover her mouth. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and intentional, exactly who he was. "When you first walked into Morning Verse," he said, "I had no idea that meeting you would change my life." A tear slipped down her cheek, but the more time we spent together, the more I realized something. I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. He looked up at her. "Acheong, will you marry me?" For a moment she couldn't speak. Seoul glowed below them. A gentle breeze moved through the air. And Acheong, who had prayed quietly for years, who had given this to God and trusted without knowing where the trust was leading, laughed through her tears. "Yes." Sung exhaled. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. They simply stood there, on top of a tower in a city neither of them had expected to change their lives, holding on. When Acheng told Mwende the next morning, the reaction was exactly what Ji-sung expected. She screamed. Then she grabbed Acheng's hand to look at the ring. Then she screamed again. Then she hugged her so tightly they both nearly fell over. "I can't believe this is happening." Acheong was laughing and crying simultaneously. "You knew," she said, pulling back to look at Emiandia's face. "You knew. You're not even surprised." Notely, composed her expression into something innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about," Acheong pointed at her. "You knew." Mwende burst out laughing. "I told him she's going to faint. I was close." They sat together on the couch for a long time after that. Acheong, with the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. Mwende, beside her, quiet now, thinking about her own quiet certainty, about Insu, about the feeling that had been growing since long before she returned to Seoul. Over the next few weeks, wedding planning became the center of everything, and Wenda quickly became the unofficial wedding planner. And surprisingly, she loved it. She had a talent for this kind of thing, the same patience and attention to detail she brought to her research work. Applied now to flowers and seating arrangements and which songs should play as a Cheong walked down the aisle. She sat at the window table each morning, laptop open, notes spread around her, making calls and sending emails with total focus. Insu brought her coffee without being asked. He refilled her tea in the afternoons. One evening, watching her laugh with a Cheong over a disagreement about centerpieces, he felt the thought arrive with complete clarity. He wanted this. Not someday, not eventually. Soon. That night, Insu lay awake for a long time. He thought about everything they had built together across 6 months of distance. The calls that had stretched past midnight. The messages that had become the first thing he checked in the morning and the last thing he looked at before sleep. The specific way she laughed when something genuinely surprised her. He thought about the window seat, about how he had kept it empty without thinking about it, and how that had told him something before he was ready to admit it. And he thought about the fact that she was here, in Seoul, in the city he loved, at the table that had become hers. He didn't want to wait. He knew what he wanted. And he knew God had been building this slowly and faithfully. The way he builds things meant to last. He got up and started making plans. A week before Acheng's wedding, Insu asked Imoinde to take a walk with him after the café closed. She agreed without questioning it, pulling on her jacket and following him out into the warm evening air. They wandered through quiet streets, talking about nothing in particular. The wedding, the week ahead, a funny thing that had happened at Morning Verse that afternoon. Eventually, they reached a small park overlooking the Han River. The city lights were reflected on the water below, doubling themselves in a shimmer of gold and white, and Wende leaned against the railing, looking out at it. "This city is starting to feel like home," she said. There was a peace in her voice when she said it. Not wistfulness, just honesty. Insu looked at her for a moment. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. She turned toward him. Something in his expression made her go still. I've been thinking a lot about the future, he said. About what I want it to look like. He reached into his jacket pocket. Wenda's eyes widened. Wait, what? He smiled. The smile she had come to love. The one that appeared slowly and meant everything. I know this might feel sudden, he said. He opened the box. But I've known for a long time. I think you have too. Wendy felt tears fill her eyes. He looked at her steadily, calmly, the way he looked at everything he was certain about. I don't want to imagine my life anywhere that you're not. A pause. Will you marry me? The Han River glowed below them. The city moved gently around them. Wenda looked at this man who had noticed her from a window seat, who had kept her tea warm and her place held, who had prayed for her across thousands of kilometers of ocean. She laughed softly through her tears. Yes. Chiang and Ji-sung's wedding took place on a warm spring afternoon. The venue was small and full of light, a beautiful room in a quiet part of the city, decorated simply, which was exactly how Chiang had wanted it. Friends and colleagues had come from Belgium, from Korea, from Kenya, including Chiang as parents, whose presence made the day feel complete in a way nothing else could. Wendy stood beside Chiang in the moments before the ceremony. She adjusted the veil, checked the flowers, did all the things a best friend does while pretending to be composed when she is absolutely not. You look, she started. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Don't, Chiang said immediately. If you cry, I will cry, and then my face will be a mess, and I haven't come this far to walk down the aisle looking like that. Wendy laughed, and somehow managed to hold it together. Soft music played as Chiang walked down the aisle. Ji-sung stood at the front, calm as always. But when Chiang appeared at the end of the aisle, something in his face shifted. His expression, already quiet, became something even quieter. The kind of stillness that is not absence, but fullness. When she reached him, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered, You look beautiful. She laughed quietly. You're not supposed to say that yet, I know, he said. I couldn't wait. The ceremony was simple, faith-filled, and full of the particular joy of two people who had trusted God with something important and watched him come through in a way neither of them had expected. When they said I do, everyone in the room cheered. Wenda's mascara did not survive. She had known this would happen and had packed a backup. 3 months later, another wedding took place in Seoul. This time, Wendy stood at the front. She had chosen a rooftop with a view of the Han River in the early evening, when the light was golden and the city was at its most beautiful. In Sue's idea, she had said yes immediately. Chang sat in the front row with Ji-sung beside her, holding a small handkerchief she had brought specifically for this moment. When the music started and Wendy appeared at the back of the rooftop, Chang exhaled slowly. She had watched her best friend move through the world with quiet patience for years. She had watched her pray for things she didn't demand, trust for things she couldn't see, show up faithfully to a life that was good, but not yet whole. And now she was watching her walk toward a man who had noticed her from a window seat. Chiang pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. Sue waited at the front of the rooftop. He watched Wendy walking toward him and felt something that was beyond words but very close to gratitude. When she reached him, she smiled. Ready? He nodded. I've been ready for a long time. Below them, the Han River caught the last of the golden light, and above them, Seoul stretched out in every direction. The city that had brought them here. The city that had become home. Life settled into a new rhythm in Seoul. Morning Verse continued welcoming customers every day. The coffee was still excellent. The music was still exactly the right volume. But now, the café was more than just a café. It was where two love stories had started. Ah Chi-young and Ji-sung lived a short walk away. She had moved her freelance work to Seoul, which, as it turned out, was not the difficult decision she had imagined it would be. One-day had transferred within her company to a Seoul-based role. Helsinki had been home for 6 years, and she would always love it. But she had known, somewhere between the window seat and the Han River proposal, that home had shifted. She had let it shift. A year later, the four of them sat together at the window table each morning before the café opened, sometimes laughing, sometimes sharing stories, sometimes watching their children sleep peacefully in strollers beside them. And every once in a while, Enwi and Da would look across the café at the window seat where everything had started. The small corner, the afternoon light, the ordinary table that had held an extraordinary beginning. She smiled quietly, not at the nostalgia of it, but at the faithfulness. They had come to Seoul because of Kadramas. They had stayed because God had arranged something in a quiet café on a side street that neither of them had known to look for. And he had done it in the most ordinary way imaginable: a seat by the window, a cup of coffee, and a name above the door that said exactly what he had been doing all along. Morning by morning. New mercies. They came to Seoul for 3 months because of K-dramas. They found a café on a quiet side street. They met 2 men who changed their lives. And God, who had been writing this story long before any of them arrived, brought it all together. 2 proposals, 2 weddings, 1 window seat that held a place for love until it was ready. 1 café named after a verse that said everything, morning by morning. New mercies. This is what Written by Grace, Faith, and Forever Stories is for. Stories that remind you God is still writing beautiful things, quietly, faithfully, in the most ordinary places. Subscribe to Written by Grace, Faith, and Forever Stories. Share the Seoul Trilogy with everyone you love. And come back, because there are more stories coming. Every one of them begins with a prayer. Every one of them ends with his plan.